Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and today I'm working on making a pair of eyes for Rhyllyn. Lots of people wanted to see how I was planning to make these, so here we go. I'm starting by pouring resin bases for eyes. This one is a mold I made using eye bases I sculpted myself, but I'm also going to be using some bases with a flat iris that I'm casting from a mold I bought online. If you're interested in making your own molds, you can see how I did it in my very first eye making video. Otherwise, you can get silicone molds for making eyes from places like Etsy and Taobao really easily. I've been doing a lot with resin lately, partly because it's really versatile, and partly because it has a short shelf life after it's been open. So I'm trying to use as much as I can in a short window of time. One thing I started playing with was using leftover materials, such as this clear resin that yellowed while it was waiting for me to use it. The discoloration doesn't affect the curing, so I figured I could dye it. Most clear resins available in craft stores are epoxy resin, meaning they're less sensitive to additives like dye. One thing I discovered works really well for dyeing epoxy was leftover printer ink from a refill kit I had for an old printer. I didn't bother pulling the bubbles out of this as it cured, so the surface isn't quite perfect, but you can see how beautifully this worked to dye the resin. It's perfectly clear with a smooth and consistent color. I might play with this for making more unusual eyes, because I really love the clarity. Whenever you dye resin though, you have to be sure you're using the right dye for the type of resin you're using. While my clear resin is epoxy, my white resin is polyurethane, which means you can only use dyes made specifically for polyurethane resin. I'll show you what happens if you don't. Polyurethane resin is a lot more sensitive to temperature, moisture, and contaminants. I mix the color into one half since this stuff cures really quickly. Then I stir the two halves together. You can see the chemical reaction starts almost as soon as I pour it. It actually bubbles up so much so fast that I have to hurry and put some of it into another mold I have handy to keep it from overflowing and making a huge mess. This causes huge bubbles of gases in the resin, leaving you with a gross lump of distorted plastic. So you can see it's always important to make sure you're using the right dye for your resin, and make sure you know whether you're using epoxy, polyester, or polyurethane resin in your castings, because each of those has different needs. I'll share more on that in the future, but for now back to the eyes. I'll be starting with a base coat of acrylic paint, using two different colors. Then the fun stuff will start when it's dry. I really like making my own doll eyes, even though I'm still learning how to do it really well. Eye making is really expensive though, especially when you're first getting started. So I wanted to be sure to send a big thank you to my supporters on Patreon this month. Without your support, I wouldn't have been able to do all the experimenting I have this month, so I really hope you've learned something from my adventures. Like Rune, Rhyllyn's eyes are supposed to glow, so several months ago I ordered some glow-in-the-dark pigment powder off eBay. I got blue and purple, just in case I decide to make more eyes for Rune later on. They don't look like much like this, but they glow pretty bright. My camera doesn't really do it justice. I'll add this pigment to the eyes I've made by mixing some powder into Liquitex gloss varnish. I find the gloss varnish is thinner than the matte ones, so it's a bit easier to stir the powder in. Once I get a nice smooth mix, I fill the eye wells completely because I want a really intense glow. This occasionally dries with air bubbles in the deepest parts of the eye, but that can be fixed by simply mixing another batch and dripping it in to fill the bubbles. For the pupils and other decorations in fancier eyes, I like using acrylic and metal gems and pearls for nail art. A friend gave me this one for Christmas, and the little black flatbacks will be perfect for these eyes. I try to keep a few trays of these around all the time. dip the flatbacks in glue and then put them in the eye. I use a needle to nudge the pupil around until it's right in the middle. Then I give it a full night to dry. Once it's dry, I'll add the clear cornea to these eyes using Solarez UV Cure Polyester Resin. Solarez is usually pretty thin, but I've had this bottle for well over a year, and it's started to thicken up, which actually makes it perfect for doming doll eyes. I use a plastic pipette to suck up a bit of resin and then carefully drip it into the iris, building the dome a little bit at a time. If any bubbles come up, I pop them with a pen. The real trouble comes from bubbles that might be hiding under the pupil, which I end up having in a few of these eyes. That's why I made so many, and a variety of styles and sizes. I was bound to get a few pairs that worked. After the eyes are cured under a UV light, they're finished, and all charged up so you can see how they glow. The thicker the layer of glow powder, the brighter the glow. Air bubbles can interfere with the glow, so I'll probably make more eyes to get a perfect pair. But this is great for a first batch. I tried the biggest pair in Rhyllyn, and they look really good. If these didn't have a bubble in the glow layer, they'd be perfect. But at least I only have to replace one eye. I'll probably experiment with a few more sizes and styles, just to be sure I'm happy with it, but I really like this color. And that's all for today. Next up, making his wig. Thanks for watching. Bye.